Hello and welcome to our Veronica Mars review. I'm Paul,
And I'm Dave.
and this week we're discussing the episode Weapons of Class Destruction. This episode originally aired April 12th, 2005. Why don't we start off with the number one film at the box office this week, Dave? And I'm going to go ahead and tell you it is not the same as last week. It is a different film.
Understandable, but also mildly saddening. But then also the case of, especially with that movie from last week, kind of puts a stamp on things from that time. But also the marvelous case of wasn't paying attention to what was in the theater around that time, I'm certain. Hmm.
Yeah, I feel like this. You probably don't remember this movie coming out. Um, I I know there was a bunch of legal issues with it, so I don't know. I think that probably impacted how well it did, and I think it
Hmm.
also screwed up its home video release maybe.
Oh, okay.
And I don't think it's
Now,
got it.
despite all the things you're saying, yeah, it's still kind of a case of at the time I was not paying attention to all the controversy.
So it was a movie called Sahara or Sahara, I guess.
Hmm.
It's yeah, I mean, it's like this kind of action adventure film with Matthew McConaughey and Penelope Cruz.
Hmm.
It didn't do terribly well at the box office. It was budgeted at 160 million and only made 119, so it definitely lost a bunch of money.
Hmm. Because
Um,
again, it tracks, but it's also kind of the case of, yeah, not even ringing any sort of thing of a bell. Understandable with everything you've mentioned there, but also just the case of, yeah, it's lost to the annals of history now.
yeah, and I think there was just from a quick glance at Wikipedia here, there was a lawsuit that then went on until like the end of 2012 about the rights to the film and stuff. So yeah,
Ooh.
yeah. Moving on to the number one song in America, Dave. Any guesses? We forgot to do this last week, so it's the same both weeks.
Oh, okay. Yeah, around that time.
I'll give you a hint. It's the most 2005 man you can imagine.
Oh boy. Again, I most likely know a name, but case of which song it specifically is, not too sure.
It is Candy Shop by 50 Cent featuring Olivia.
No, that tracks. Though still, it's a marvelous case of the only reason I know that song is because Weird Al parodied it.
Ah, okay. That makes sense. Alrighty, moving on to video games. There's not much this week, actually, surprisingly.
Nah, from the bounce from this episode to this one.
Yeah, so on April 6th, if you had a PSP, you could pick up Archer McLaren's Mercury, which
Ah,
looks like it was like an interesting kind of puzzle game.
yes. Always messing with the fancy goo, getting it from one place to another.
Yes. There was also one of these that came out on the Wii. I don't know if it's the same developer or not.
I think the case of same idea and concept, but probably different developer.
Potentially, potentially. Also on April 6th, if you had an Xbox, you could pick up Close Combat First to Fight, which is some
Yeah.
squad based tactical shooter that I don't remember at all.
Yeah, kind of the marvelous case of all them particular war style games that were out at the time.
Yes, squad based shooters were really big at this time. April 11th, if you had a PS2 or Xbox, you could pick up Midnight Club 3 Dub Edition.
Yeah, understandable, but also kind of the case of is it really necessary? Really?
I mean, this is back when Rockstar made games that weren't Grand Theft Auto.
Nah, that's definitely true. Before it kind of exploded into what it was supposedly become.
Actually, no, they also still make Red Dead Redemption occasionally.
Hmm.
And finally, on April the 12th, if you had an Xbox, you could pick up a game called Jade Empire.
Ah, yes. With diving into the case of making a action role-playing game in the same similar sort of style of a roundish or Fable at the time, but giving it a completely different style.
Yes, it is interesting. It's a BioWare game, which I didn't know. And apparently, it uses the same morality system from Knights of the Old Republic.
Yeah. And on the most part, it was interesting enough, but also kind of the case of BioWare game with being as long as it was and all the particular stuff it going through, and just the multitude of decisions. It was good that they thought about it, but oh god, all of the decisions.
Oh, so is it like not a good game, or
Well, for the basic concepts and the ideas it has for it, it's definitely interesting, but it's kind of a case of you have to be ready for everything that the game decides to throw at you, and if you're not, it is going to be many walls that you're going to have to bash your head against.
I gotcha. Okay, okay. It does seem interesting because I believe it's inspired by like Chinese mythology or something.
Yes, with all of its fanciful stories, mythologies, and demons that they bother bringing into it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's interesting enough. Anyway, let us move on to the episode. So, some things are going to happen in this episode, Dave.
Hooray! As if this place doesn't have any more concerns than it already does.
Oh boy. Okay. So we start the episode with Veronica kissing Leo outside of her house. After Veronica goes back inside, Keith announces that he has begun dating Wallace's mother, Alicia, making things awkward between Veronica and Wallace. Veronica notices a sign outside which says killemall.net. Fun fact, I tried going to this website, but it is currently no longer up, and apparently it just redirected you to the UPN site.
Um, Understandable, but also mild sadness.
In class, there is a fire drill, and Duncan says that it will be the third one this week. Veronica talks to Principal Clemens about the fire drill issue, but he doesn't give up anything to her, just saying that they fell a little behind on the amount they have to do this semester, so they're catching up. Later, she notices police officers with service dogs going through the building. Veronica, posing as a superintendent, calls Principal Clemens, who reveals that the school has experienced several bomb threats. She prints the story in the school newspaper, causing chaos at the school the next day. Principal Clemens calls her in and tells her to stop printing these kinds of stories. Veronica and Wallace talk to each other while Keith and Alicia watch a movie. Alicia tries to convince Wallace to accept their relationship, but to no avail. After talking to Mac, another student, Pete, approaches Veronica to say that he saw two students, Ben, who is played by one of the guest stars this week, Jonathan Taylor Thomas,
Hmm.
and Norris, with exploding tennis balls. Wallace places the two students under more suspicion when he tells Veronica about them, and Veronica sees a mysterious timer on the website. Duncan and Meg approach Veronica, and she tells Meg the general overview of the case where someone has been evading capture and all the tactics they used to do so before Duncan suddenly leaves. Wallace gives Veronica the student file on one of the two students, but his high school records are clean after bullying in junior high. The other student doesn't have a file. Veronica talks to Duncan, who says he knows about her investigation. Duncan scoffs at her findings before he realizes that she suspects him in the murder of his sister, reacting with extreme rage before dashing out of the room. Ben and Norris talk about guns and bombs, leading Veronica to track Ben, eventually seeing him buy fertilizer and taking out a rifle. Ben gets into the car and orders her to drive to the Camelot Motel. There, Logan appears and beats him up before it is revealed that the suspect is actually an ATF agent. Ben says that he is investigating Norris but needs her help. Norris has a crush on Veronica, reasonable, and Ben asks her to get close to him. As soon as she leaves the motel, Veronica and Logan kiss unexpectedly. Probably something you didn't expect to see. Also, you probably didn't expect to see the crew member off to the left hand side and a bunch of equipment on the right hand roof.
Uh, on the one hand, with this particular scene, it probably would have been enough of a distraction for some particular people, but also the case of, yeah, yeah, the fun of doing a TV show, people.
Yes, they try to do this big sweeping shot, like a crane shot, and one of the crew members it was not out of view.
Just thank God it's not like that one particular scenario that everything needs to be perfect or they have to reshoot all over again.
It's one of those things where I think if you don't know that they're there, you probably won't see them. Like, it's one of
Yeah.
those things where I'm like, I've seen this episode a few times, so I know that they're there. But I think if it's your
Mm.
first time watching, especially in 2005 when you're watching on like a 20-inch TV, you're probably not going to see them.
Mm.
Veronica gets an invitation to Norris's house, but she doesn't find any weapons. Veronica calls Mac to help her break into the Wi-Fi before she sees Pete in the front of the house. The ATF searches Norris's vehicle and finds fertilizer and a rifle, despite Veronica's convictions that he is not the perpetrator. However, Veronica recognizes them as being the same ones Ben was loading into his car earlier. Veronica calls Pete and she tells him that he knows he was falsely implicated by Norris with the help of the ATF agent because of terrible bullying in junior high. Meg tells Veronica that Duncan has disappeared after removing $10,000 from a bank account. The story involving Norris is published in the newspaper, and although it leads to all charges against Norris being dropped, it results in the new journalism teacher's termination. The new journalism teacher, who is played by Joy Lauren Adams, who I was very, very happy to see. Unfortunately, she's only going to be in one episode.
Mm.
So, first off, what did you think of this episode, Dave?
I think with this particular one, on the one hand, when I first heard the concept of the show kind of once it got started and whatnot, I was like, how is this going to go? Because it's a typical sort of story I've seen through most of my life, and in some cases, a lot of particular people don't bother really doing a well enough job with it, especially around that time frame. But I think just with how the story sort of went along with it and did the story of it all, it was definitely nice to see, though it was still kind of those hints of God, they were so close to screwing it up in places. I think the other particular thought watching through this particular episode is the concept that they bring up with using the newspaper for discussing these sorts of things and bringing up the additional concept of, yes, you can tell the truth, but how well is it going to help out the situation, causing a panic with certain sort of things in that? It's always nice to see, and just an additional a nice thing to sort of add on to the story to emphasize with the particular sort of things, either with uh, younger people watching it around the time or other sorts of things to keep within the story. I think at the very most, just with the bits within the story and whatnot, despite the fact that there wasn't uh, too much overlay with the big concept of the actual Veronica or actual show and whatnot, keeping within this, it was nice enough for somewhat of a filler episode, I suppose. But still, it was very much interesting for seeing the concept it went with, the stuff that Veronica had to go through. And I somewhat agree. I knew of the particular character that was decently obvious within the episode, but also the case of it was interesting just with the characters that they had within this, especially with the second actor that you mentioned, Joy
Joey
Lauren
Lauren
Adams,
Adams. Yes.
that worked as the news teacher and whatnot, being case that she wasn't exactly qualified to do her job and whatnot, but was still willing to go through all that sort of stuff. Though there were little hints of like, was that part of the character? Was that other sorts of stuff going on? Whether or not I was overthinking it or not, um, supposedly can be discussed. But I think on whole it's well enough, but also kind of a case of if you had to skip one of the episodes, I wouldn't be so sad of sticking one of these onto the list.
Okay, so I really like this episode. Part of that is probably because Joey Lauren Adams is in it, and she's also like in one of my favorite movies ever. So anything she's in gets a bonus from me.
Hmm.
For those of you who haven't seen Chasing Amy, go out and see Chasing Amy. Keeping in mind that that movie was made in 1997 and in some ways might not completely hold up to a modern audience, but it's still really, really good. Go see Chasing Amy. I thought this was fun. I'm curious to see what you think of the relationship between Veronica and Logan going forward, because I feel like that probably isn't something you expected to happen.
There was a little bit of stuff that they had with bits of interactions, other sorts of stuff from there. On the one hand, I'm not too surprised that Logan would push onto that sort of stuff from there. I think it's mostly the question of what sort of stuff is either going to happen to Veronica or where's her headspace going to be going forward that would either cause the situation to be pushed further along and or cause more issues with the additional characters within the story.
There's going to be things. Anyway,
Isn't there always?
next week we'll be discussing the episode Hot Dogs.
Oh no. Just mentioning with that, it's just either the basis thing, but don't you be telling me that the Veronica's dog is going to be having issues within this episode.
In this episode, a student named Mandy hires Veronica to help her find her lost dog. Meanwhile, the Eccles family deals with Trina's domestic abuse, and Weevil gets arrested for breaking into the Kane home. And no, don't worry, Backup will not be harmed.
Oh, thank goodness.
Because Backup is a very good boy.
Yes, Backup is the best boy.
He is a very, very good boy, yes. Alrighty, so until next week, I'm Paul.
And I'm Dave.